Matthew here from MiniWarGaming.com. Gonna scratch my lip. It was itchy. Welcome to another episode of Developer Diaries, where I talk about the rules development for Ravaged Star, but I talk more about rules development in general. So if you are an aspiring rules writer, then, or if you're an avid rules writer or a veteran rules writer, then this video is great for you because you can help participate in the discussion. I'd love you to leave comments as you watch this video. Pause it and leave a comment, and then pause it again and reply to your comment with more comments. I promise to read all of the comments here in Discord and Reddit, everywhere they happen to be about Ravaged Star rules development, as I need all of the help I can get, and I really want this to be a community-driven game as well. So lots of links in the description to all sorts of stuff. But the idea behind this is I'm going to talk about different theories of game design, and I also want to talk specifically about decisions that I'm making for Ravaged Star. In today's video, we're going to talk about movement and how movement is portrayed between different games, and what I like and I don't like, and what I've decided to go for Ravaged Star. So spoiler alert, Star Wars Legion introduced the coolest movement system ever, and that's what I've decided to incorporate with some modifications into Ravaged Star. Now, if you don't know how Star Wars Legion works, if you've played any war game, you're probably used to the fact that if you have a squad of guys, or let's say you have 5 guys and they can move 6 inches, you would measure each guy's movement separately, and that's all fine and dandy. Once you have 20 guys or 30 guys you're moving, you're probably like me, where you carefully measure the first few and then you kind of shove the rest over there. But that technically is against the rules. And Star Wars Legion, instead, you have one unit leader or sergeant, whatever you want to call it. And when you go to move the squad, you just move that unit leader and you pick up the rest of the models and you stick them in coherency. Now your brain might immediately, if you've played a lot of games, go like, oh, that's so abusable because you can place the models wherever you want. Well, there's 2 answers to that. First off, yeah, you're right, and you both can do it, so whatever. And second, you measure all distances from the unit leader in the squad to the nearest model in whatever target squad. And so, for the most part, you're not able to abuse it as the person moving, because wherever the unit leader moves, that's the one that you kind of check line of sight to. And so it's less abusable than you think. It kind of turns your units, and maybe some of you wouldn't like this thought, it turns your units into a unit leader with a bunch of wound markers all around him. But thematically, it looks cool on the table because you still get all these dudes. Anyways, that has become my favorite movement system, and we've been using it in Ravaged Star. And that definitely is never going to change, no matter what people say. I'm like, sorry, I'm married to that idea now. But it does beg the question of movement systems. If the Star Wars Legion movement system is so good, were they just lucky and they happened to develop the best movement system ever? Or is it just not the best movement system ever and it just works in certain circumstances? Or is it actually a really garbage movement system and you hate it absolutely? Well, I want to know. Leave a comment below. So as we look at movement systems through a lot of different games, there's a lot of things you have to consider when it comes to a miniature war game. First off, it's not a board game, and so you don't have grids typically. I know games like Battletech do, but even Battletech, when you play it more like a war game and less like a little skirmish 3 or 4 mechs on 3 or 4 mechs, you play Alpha Strike, for example, that game can easily be played without having your hexes on the table. It can be played with them too, don't get me wrong. But that game can totally be played hexless, in which case you're back to the same type of movement system that everybody else has. And that is model by model, you measure where they can go and you move. But there's all of a sudden with miniature war games is you want to build a beautiful table. And terrain is both the biggest blessing and the biggest bane of miniature war games. On the one hand, it looks awesome. On the other hand, it gets in the way of filming, of playing, it makes arguments of how does it interact? Can I see your model? Can I not see your model? How do we do line of sight? That's almost another discussion altogether. All of these different things. Different systems treat terrain in different ways. So on the more micro scale, if you look at small skirmish games, they're going to have all sorts of different ways you interact with terrain. They're going to have climb speeds. Okay, like in Necromunda, you have a building that's 6 inches tall, and this is way higher than 6 inches, so just think of it to scale. And a model wants to climb it, it'll cost them 12 inches of movement. Unless there's a ladder, in which case it only costs them 6 inches of movement, but then another inch to get over here. And you see that, so it's 6 inches up and 1 inch over. So you need 7 inches of movement to get there. Some games will let you stop midway up the ladder. Lord of the Rings, I believe, does that. Or heck, they even technically allow you to stop halfway up to climbing a sheer cliff if you're like a goblin or something. Others won't. They say if you can't make the distance, then you can't do it. Others will be like if you want to climb, it's a specific skill you have to pass. Like I played This Is Not a Test, and This Is Not a Test just says that it takes one of your actions just to move up there. It doesn't matter what the distance was. And they each have their pros and their cons. Some of them are fast, some of them are more gritty because you want that grittiness. If you want to set up a Necromunda game where you only have a handful of models, then you want every little piece of terrain to kind of interact the way it looks like it will. And some games will let you open and shut doors, or lock doors and unlock doors and destroy doors, or you have Marvel Crisis Protocol, which goes to another level and says you can pick up pieces of terrain and throw it around. Either way, it's going to greatly influence how the movement of your system works. Marvel Crisis Protocol basically says, the height of the building compared to the height of your model determines whether it slows you down or whether you can pass over it, whether you can climb up it, how you interact with it. So every game has their way. Then you get 40K, who just says, are you infantry? Just pass through these buildings. So I don't care. It just counts as you being able to find your way through windows and doors. We don't want to slow you down too much with terrain. And where Ravished Star kind of goes somewhere in between, where you have to, you don't just get to pass through terrain unless there's a door or something. You've got to go around it. And that was an important design decision early on, just because we found that we needed that kind of motion throughout the table to kind of create a more dynamic back and forth, rather than units just being able to charge right across the table. Whew. Anyways, so movement, yeah, and then you got jumping. Like, how do you cross gaps, for example? Like, if we're playing 40K, and technically I got to go down and go back up, but what if there's just a 1-inch gap? Would you and your opponent agree that you can just cross that? What if you just create the rule that, well, if it's the size of your base, you can cross it, when if it's not the size of your base, you can't? Well, what if it's lower? What if I want to go from here to here? How do I jump down? What if it's really lower? What if it's higher? How do you deal with that? What if something can fly? Do you just have it ignore terrain like 40K used to, and just kind of start from one place and end in another, and as long as that distance is within their movement, you're good? Or do you do new 40K where it's like, no, you got to trace a path for this thing, which greatly slows down the game if you're flying with a unit of guys. You got 20 gargoyles from the Tyranids, and you want to pass over a piece of terrain, and you got to measure every stupid freaking model. And I'm like, screw that. I'm going to do the first few and then move the rest, because it just takes too much time, and it's not adding anything to the game to force me to take that much time. And then if you have the movement system of Star Wars Legion, or what Ravished Star will have, you could trace the moon, because it's only one dude you have to move. And so then you can bring back all that nitty-gritty stuff if you want to. But you don't always have to. Then you got difficult terrain, like, there's a crater. So when you move through the crater, should it cost you half of your movement? So like if you want to pass 4 inches of difficult terrain, it should cost you 8 inches of your movement. Or should it just be that if you enter difficult terrain at any point, you're -2 to your movement? Which one's better? Once again, I want your comments below. But there is no answer to this. I'm going to say that. And you can disagree with me. In fact, I invite you to, and give me your thesis in the comments as to why I am wrong. But it really comes down to what the game is trying to accomplish. I keep saying this, and I probably should give it context. When I was a kid, I loved making games, specifically role-playing games. And I went on a forum, because back then forums were a big thing. In fact, they were the only thing, because I'm ancient, and this was just after the days of the dot-com bubble crash, or bubble burst. So when I say I was young, I wasn't a teenager. I think I was a young adult at this point. And I went on this one forum. I think it was called RPG.net, or RPG, whatever. It was it was a forum for people who wanted to create RPGs. And back then, my idea of game design was very, very flawed and very young and naive. And it still is flawed right now, but I've learned a lot since then. I'm trying to make a role-playing system, and it has strength and dexterity and intelligence and wisdom and charisma. Does it sound familiar? Yeah. And I was greatly influenced by games like Fallout, and also games like Dungeons & Dragons. And and I've developed all sorts of uses for strength and dexterity and intelligence and wisdom and all that. But my problem is I couldn't figure out how to use charisma, because in my game, I liked role-playing things. And so charisma just didn't seem to really have a place in the game, because we would just role-play it, right? If you want to lie to the NPC you're talking to, we'll role-play it. And then we'll improv it and see if it really made sense. The group that I had, once again, purpose, right? The group that I had was really good at that. And so we didn't need to roll for persuasion or roll to see if you deceive them. You just talk to me and let's improv. And if it made sense, then it made sense. And I remember going on the forum and saying just this: I got a use for everything, but I can't figure out a use for charisma. And somebody said something to me that I still have not forgotten. I don't remember who they are, but it's influenced my game design ever since then. They said, well, why do you need it? And I said, well, you need charisma in a game. And they're like, no, you don't. It depends on the game that you're making. So you're deciding to keep something in the game simply because other games have it. And I was like, yeah, you're right. They don't need it. and I took it out of the game. And I'm like, I never thought of that. It just didn't cross my mind that I didn't need it. And the same thing with movement. When I played Star Wars Legion, and I was like, it didn't even occur to me that moving all the guys is really arbitrary. That if you just move the unit leader, then move everybody in coherency, that speeds up the game, and it doesn't ruin the game. In fact, I would argue it makes it better, because then you kind of just place your guys thematically rather than gaming it, right? And I was like, it was just a light bulb going on, and it's influenced how I approach game design. And like, I've done over 70 narrative campaigns in Warhammer 40k, Age of Sigmar, and some other games, and that's been part of it. When I develop, because I usually develop rules for them, like specific campaign rules. Like, we'll use the core of the game, but then I'll modify it heavily. And as I write those rules, it's incredibly stripped down. It is just what I need. And if I end up needing something else as we play, I'll add it then, rather than trying to come up with this super structure at the beginning that can incorporate everything. It's like, no, let's just have it focus on what it needs to do. And then if later on that expands and it becomes too clunky, well, then you do a second edition and you kind of restart, but you take some of those core concepts and you rewrite them in. And it was such a good piece of advice, and yet seems so obvious now. And you might even think, well, that was dumb. And you're right, I was dumb. I was younger. I probably still am dumb. And in 20 years, I'll look back and be like, boy, younger Matthew was dumb. And the cycle will continue. I hope so, because if you don't look back and think that you were dumb, then you probably still are dumb. I hate to tell you that. You can quote me on that. If you don't think you used to be dumb, then you're probably dumb, if you can't see that growth. Anyways, so yeah, you have to kind of look at it that way. Like, do you want there to be rules for interacting with terrain to the point of, this is how you climb, this is how you jump, this is how you fall, this is how you do this? The question you should always ask is why? Does it add to your game enough to add the complexity that's going to do? And games like Necromunda, where you have a handful of models, absolutely. Larger scale games, I would argue no, because it slows the game down, it's more rules to learn, and it doesn't add enough to the game. Like, sure, it'd be cool to watch something fall off the building and take damage because of that, and so you can push them back, but then you're going to have more arguments about positioning of models and stuff. Not worth it. Just not worth all the extra rules. So yeah, that's what I think about movement systems. Have I covered everything I want to cover? I don't know. I'm just kind of winging this and just figuring this out as I go along. Kind of like how I do everything else. It's like, rather than try to solve every problem, you solve the problems as you come along and you come and face them. So what do you think? We're talking movement systems here, but you can also mix in like how it interacts with terrain, how it interacts with shooting, how it interacts with charging, and all those kind of things. So leave comments below. Have I talked long enough for this video? Let's see. I have pretty much talked long enough. So I was shooting for around 15 minutes for each of these developer diaries because I don't want to bore you. I just want to be able to get to the point and talk about a bunch of stuff and then just sign off and do the next one. So let's do our post-amble here. This is where you can click off the video and not miss anything except the important stuff. I got a bunch of links for you down below. We got the Ravaged Star tabletop game launching sometime, or maybe it launched. I don't know. I'm making a lot of these videos, so who knows when they go out. There will be links below if this is before the campaign launches, which I think this will be. Then if you follow it before it launches and then participate in the campaign, you will get a free miniature. And you can't get that miniature for free later. You can buy it later. So it's your chance to get an extra thing. It'll help support MiniWarGaming, and I hope get you a bunch of really cool looking miniatures that you will love to play in either your own games or specifically Ravaged Star, the war game. Also, I've got playtest games up. I got the rules available for those that want to peruse them or playtest them. And I got a Discord server for you guys to come and leave comments. I'm going to kind of monitor everywhere for comments. I promise to read everything, but I will not respond to everything. But I will let it all kind of cook inside of this noggin of mine. So all the links will be in the description below. So go check all those out. Thank you so much for joining me in this developer diary. Stay tuned for more of them. This is Matthew from MiniWarGaming. Happy wargaming.